So now that we've talked about the areas of psychological research and different sources of knowledge, we can jump right in and get into a lot of the meat here. We'll do items 3 through 6 in this presentation. A little bit about critical thinking, a couple of kinds of research, basic and applied, a few goals of science, and different methods that can be used to attain those goals. And then in my third segment, I'll tell you a little bit about doing science, proof and disproof, and the research process. Okay, so scientific approach is what psychology is all about, right? Because psychologists are scientists and need to use this scientific methodology. So, to tell you what that is, first I'll start off by telling you what it is not. And sometimes with lay people, pseudosciences can be confused for actual science, but they shouldn't be. These two things should not be confused because a pseudoscience doesn't follow an empirical method, and it just kind of poses itself as a science, even though it's not. So I thought I would just pull up real quick this. There's a really good demonstration on Wikipedia I can show you. So here, and this is just if you look up pseudoscience on the internet, this is what'll show up on Wikipedia. There's superstitions right here, and then you have a pseudoscience, which is presented as a science or looks like one. Then you have these different kinds of sciences, and these are all treated with the scientific method, but only mainstream science is systematized as with this scientific rigor and these scientific definitions, and we'll get into that a little bit. So what's an example of a pseudoscience? I have a kind of fun example for you right here.
Today, you'll find out what Dionne Warwick has to say about the Psychic Friends Network.
I think that anyone watching this show can benefit from speaking to a psychic.
900 number, right? So there's this guy named The Amazing Randi, James Randi, and you can go to his website. It's randi.org. Randi.org. And he's actually got $1 million challenge if anyone can prove psychic abilities. And right here on the website, they have the rules and guidelines. And you can see here, this was first introduced in 1964, and no one has claimed the money yet. So a picture of Randi, and he said, anyone who proves a genuine psychic power under proper observing conditions would be able to be given $1 million. Originally it was 1,000 as the website shows, so just a little interesting tidbit. So when we hear things like this, how do we know if it's a pseudoscience and things like that? Well, first of all, you always need to be skeptical. No matter what, no matter who, you should always be skeptical of anything that you hear, and any scientist would be proud to be called a skeptic because that's a really fundamental aspect of being a scientist. You also need to be systematic with your experiments to be sure that you're actually measuring what you're setting out to measure, so that you have control over all the different variables. You're systematic in how you perform the experiments, but also in how you report them so that other people later can go back and replicate the study that you've done. So it needs to be publicly verifiable. It also needs to be a problem, when you ask the question, it needs to be potentially solvable, possible to solve, and it has to be falsifiable. Okay, all of these things are reviewed in this little handy table. Just like always, this textbook's really good with these tables for review. Now we'll talk about a couple of types of research, basic and applied. Basic research is research for its own sake, whenever you investigate something just to know why, just to know what's going on. An example of that is scientists who study the way that people make mental rotations. So if you had a geometric figure, like maybe a Tetris shape, and you tried to rotate it in your mind, how long that would take you. And that would be a basic research. There's not necessarily a directly applicable scenario where that knowledge would be useful at the current moment. So that's basic. As far as applied research, it would be things like this that are related to everyday life, right? How the steering wheel relates to your odometer and things like that, speedometer, all those. Okay. All right. So there's 3 goals of science that we'll talk about with this textbook. First is to describe, second to predict, and third is to explain. Depending on which of these goals you're aiming for, you'll do a different kind of research method and a different kind of study. So first, for a descriptive method, all that you need to do is a survey. If you're trying to find out how things are in the world, how much Americans watch television, you can just give a survey to a group of Americans that are randomly selected, and if you do the random sampling correctly, then that random sample should be representative of your population. So to make a random sample effective, any member of the population needs to be equally likely to be chosen, and you just ask them a group of questions, and then you can generalize your survey findings to a population. But it's not feasible to actually give an entire population a survey. Okay, so you do a representative sample, and that will describe some characteristics about a group of people. Next is to predict, and a correlation is a really good way to find predictive information, such as if children of parents who smoke are more likely to smoke. All you need to do is find out children who had parents who did or didn't smoke and how likely those children were to grow up and smoke. Did those 2 factors increase together? If they did, then you would have a positive correlation. So as one factor goes up, the other goes up as well. So parents who smoke increases, then children growing up and smoking increases. Parents who smoke decreases, children who smoke decreases. So it's just that they change in the same direction makes it a positive correlation, right? So this is a positive correlation, and this is a positive correlation. We're talking about the relationship between A and B. Okay. A negative correlation is the opposite of this. It's when one factor goes up, then the other will go down, okay, or variables. So as drinking and partying increases, grades tend to decline, okay. That's a negative correlation. It's an inverse relationship. The third kind of correlation is actually when there's no correlation at all. So from this 0 correlation, you can't actually make any predictions. So if you have really high intelligence, I have no idea what that says about your shoe size, right? It'll be a straight line for a 0 correlation. There's just, it might be slightly angled, but it's pretty much a flat line because these 2 things are not related, and this little dots of occurrences will just be all over the place. A positive correlation goes uphill, and a negative correlation goes downhill. Okay. And you can never show cause and effect with the correlation because it only says that as one goes up, the other also goes up or down when you have a correlation. There could be some third factor here, though, that's making them both go up or down, or or something that's causing the situation. So it would never be a causal relationship, but it can be predictive because when one's high, the other's high, or when one's high, the other's low. So you can see where the other one should be, but you don't know why. So one other kind of experiment is a quasi-experimental method, and that's whenever it's a naturally occurring group of individuals where the subjects themselves become variables. You can't make someone have grown up in a different culture. So this is really often in cross-cultural psychology. You'll compare people who are from Africa with people who are from America or Indonesia and things like that. And you can't change where someone's from. So when you compare them, it's not possible to fully manipulate all of the variables in the study. So it's called quasi-experimental because it can never be truly experimental. You don't have full control over those independent variables. Okay. So the third goal of a science would be to explain, and to do this, to do any kind of explanation, you need to do an experiment, a full experiment, where you have complete manipulation over your variables and as much control over the situation as possible, right? So you have independent variables, dependent variables, an experimental group, and a control group. And I'm going to give a demonstration of this in the next slide. For example, if our question was, does TV increase aggression? Only an experiment could tell us this, because this is a cause and effect relationship. So what we would do is, again, we would have random assignment, just like we did in the surveys that I talked about earlier. You'd randomly assign some people to the experimental group and some people to the control group. Well, earlier I talked about random sampling, but random assignment works basically the same. It's just instead of random assignment's very similar to random sampling because you're going to have it so that people are equally likely to be in either group. And in random sampling, any one from the population was equally likely to be in the study at all. In random assignment, they're equally likely to be in one or the other versions of this experiment. Okay, and then if they're in the control group, they would watch a non-violent program. And if they're in the experimental group, they would get the treatment. And in this case, the treatment would be a violent television program. And then we'll take them and put them in another room and put them with this doll. It's called a Bobo doll. And see if they beat the Bobo doll up. Okay? And we'll compare the two groups. And that's an experiment. The dependent variable would be whether or not they showed this aggressive behavior. And the independent variable would be what kind of show that they watched. The control group watched the non-violent thing, and the experimental group watched the violent program. Okay. And this is also all summed up in the chapter. So that concludes the second video, and we'll finish up